My name is Matthew Carter. I am 34 years old, and everything started on a random Thursday night in Columbus, Ohio. The kind of ordinary evening that usually fades into the background of memory, except this one did not. I was sitting on the couch in our apartment on Grand Avenue with my laptop open, scrolling through Megan's shared Google Calendar because I was trying to book a surprise dinner at that new steakhouse in the Short North District she had mentioned weeks ago. She had talked about it in passing, saying how she loved the exposed brick interior and how she had heard their ribeye was incredible. And I wanted to do something thoughtful, something spontaneous that would remind her that I still paid attention. I had the reservation page open in another tab, comparing available times, trying to find a slot that would not interfere with her client meetings. She walked into the living room quietly, and I did not even realize she was behind me until she spoke. Her voice was sharp, already charged with anger before I could process what was happening. She asked me what I was doing, and when she saw her calendar on my screen, her expression changed instantly. It was like a switch flipped. She accused me of monitoring her, of tracking her movements, of suffocating her with control. The words came out fast and loud, echoing against the walls of the apartment. I tried to explain that it was for a reservation, that I was planning a surprise dinner at the steakhouse she liked, but she cut me off mid-sentence and would not let me finish. She said it did not matter what my intention was, that the act itself was invasive, and proved her point. That was when I noticed the weekender bag by the door. It was neatly packed, zipped shut, positioned upright like it had been waiting for the right moment. Her work laptop was no longer on the kitchen counter where she usually left it. The charger was wrapped carefully around itself, not loosely tossed the way she normally did after a long day. Her car keys were already in her hand, and she was not pacing or hesitating. She looked prepared. I felt the ground shift under me because this was not a spontaneous outburst. This had been decided before she walked into that room. She told me she needed real space, not the kind where I would text her apologies or call to check in. She said I was not to contact her in any way, not by phone, not by message, not through friends. She said she would reach out when she was ready, and the way she said it made it sound indefinite, like there was no timeline and no guarantee. Her tone was cold and final, stripped of the warmth I had grown used over the years. I stood there, trying to process how a dinner reservation had turned into a full-scale exit plan at exactly 8:12 p.m. I glanced at the microwave clock, as if the time might anchor me to something real. She walked out of our apartment and slammed the door behind her. The sound echoed down the hallway, followed by silence that felt heavier than any argument. I stood there in the middle of the living room, laptop still open, reservation page glowing on the screen, her empty calendar staring back at me like proof of something I did not understand. The first night alone felt unreal in a way I cannot fully describe without sounding dramatic, because nothing in the apartment had physically changed except for the absence of one person. Yet everything felt displaced and hollow. The silence was overwhelming, not peaceful, not calming, but heavy and oppressive, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. The living room still looked exactly the same, the throat blanket folded over the arm of the chair, her shoes by the entryway, the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the air, but the energy was gone. I walked into the kitchen and saw her coffee mug sitting in the sink with a faint crescent of lipstick still visible on the rim. And that small detail hit harder than the slam door had. It was such an ordinary thing, something I'd seen 100 times before, yet now it felt like evidence of a life paused mid-sentence. I could not bring myself to go into the bedroom. The thought of lying in our bed without her felt wrong, like trespassing in a space that no longer belonged to both of us. The bedroom had become a museum of a relationship that had just cracked. Every object a reminder of shared routines, shared mornings, shared nights. I took a blanket and slept on the couch instead, though I did not really sleep. I drifted in and out of shallow, restless half-dreams, replaying the argument in my head, analyzing every word I had said, every expression on her face, trying to pinpoint the exact second it had gone beyond repair. At 2:58 a.m., I woke up suddenly, my heart pounding for no clear reason, and the first thing I did was reach for my phone. The screen lit up in the darkness, and there were no notifications. No missed calls, no messages. Nothing from her. The absence felt louder than any text could have been. I stared at the screen for a full minute before putting the phone down again, trying to convince myself that respecting her request meant not spiraling into panic at 3 in the morning. The next morning at work, I moved through my tasks mechanically, answering emails and sitting in meetings without really absorbing anything that was said. Around mid-morning, after hours of debating whether I should reach out at all, I sent exactly one text. It was simple and restrained. I wrote, "Are you okay? Can we talk?" I read it 3 times before pressing send, making sure there was no accusation in it, no pressure, no hidden tone. Then I put my phone face down on my desk and forced myself to focus on a spreadsheet while the minutes crawled by. She did not reply until hours later. When her name finally appeared on my screen, my chest tightened. Her message was brief and cold. She said that I was not listening, that the fact I had contacted her at all proved her point, that I was incapable of respecting her boundaries. She repeated that I needed to back off completely, and that she would reach out when she was ready. There was no softness in the wording, no reassurance, just a firm reiteration of distance. That was the moment something shifted in me, not explosively, not angrily, but with a quiet finality. I realized that anything I did, even something as neutral as asking if she was okay, would be interpreted as control. If she wanted space, I would give her exactly that. Not the anxious version where I hover at the edge waiting for permission to step closer, not the version where I decode every silence for hidden meaning. I would give her literal compliance. No half measures, no chasing, no follow-up texts, no attempts to explain myself further. I placed my phone back on the desk and felt an unfamiliar calm settle over me, the kind that comes when you decide to stop fighting a current and simply let it carry you where it will. That evening, after the apartment had settled into its new, unnatural quiet, I sat at the kitchen table with my phone in front of me and moved through it with a deliberate calm that surprised even me, as if I were methodically closing a chapter rather than reacting emotionally. I opened our message thread first and muted her notifications completely, not temporarily, not for a few hours, but indefinitely, removing the subtle anticipation that had already begun to build every time my screen lit up. I went into the Life 360 app and disabled location sharing, watching the small confirmation message appear on the screen, a digital acknowledgement that I was no longer tracking or being tracked. The act felt symbolic, almost ceremonial, like cutting an invisible thread that had been tying our movements together for years. Next, I opened my contacts and scrolled her name. She had been listed as my emergency contact since the week after we got married, and I hesitated for a moment before tapping edit. I removed her and replaced the entry with my younger brother, Ethan, typing his number carefully even though I knew it by heart. It felt strange, like rewriting a small but significant part of my identity. I unfollowed her on social media without blocking her because I did not want to create a spectacle or fuel any narrative about bitterness or hostility. I simply wanted distance, clean and quiet. I turned off read receipts so she would not know if or when I saw a message from her, if one ever came. Each setting I changed felt like loosening something around my neck, and I realized only then how tight it had been. There was a strange relief in it all, a subtle lightness that settled in my chest as I set the phone down. It was not happiness and it was not indifference, but it was clarity. For the first time since she walked out at 8:12 p.m., I felt like I was acting rather than reacting. I was not waiting for instructions, not scanning for signs, not bracing for the next accusation. I was simply aligning my behavior with her request in the most literal way possible. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual and walked into the kitchen with a steady sense of purpose. I made a full breakfast without rushing, without compromise, without the quiet commentary that had become routine over the years. I fried eggs in butter instead of olive oil, cooked thick slices of bacon until they were crisp, toasted bread generously, and spread it with real butter, not the low-fat substitute she preferred. I brewed strong coffee and poured it into a heavy ceramic mug, instead of the delicate white one she liked to keep pristine. No one commented on cholesterol or sodium, or how many calories I was consuming before 9 in the morning. The silence did not feel lonely. It felt neutral, almost peaceful at the office. I moved through my tasks with a steadiness that caught even me off guard. I answered emails without overthinking them, participated in meetings without that underlying hum of distraction. Around midday, my coworker Jason leaned back in his chair, studied me for a moment before saying that I seemed calmer. His tone was casual, observational rather than probing. I had not noticed a shift myself until he said it out loud. I paused, considering his words, and realized that the constant low-level tension I had grown accustomed to was absent. I was not checking my phone every few minutes, not anticipating criticism, not rehearsing explanations in my head. I simply nodded and returned to my screen, aware that something subtle but significant had changed inside me. By the second week, the silence in the apartment no longer felt like an open wound and started to feel like open space, and I found myself saying yes to things I would have instinctively declined before without even fully realizing why. My old friend Kyle texted me about a Saturday pickup basketball game in German Village, something he had invited me to countless times over the years, only for me to respond with some version of maybe next time, because weekends had always been structured around shared plans, shared errands, shared expectations. This time I replied that I would be there, and I meant it without hesitation. The court was uneven and the air was thick with early summer humidity, and I felt clumsy for the first few minutes, but then muscle memory took over and I found a rhythm in the movement, in the quick pivots and the sound of the ball hitting pavement. After the game, we grabbed burgers at a small spot nearby, and I sat there with grease on my fingers and sweat still drying on my shirt, listening to stories and laughing without glancing down at my phone even once. I realized halfway through the meal that I had not felt a reflex to check for messages, not felt the familiar tug of obligation, and the absence of that impulse felt liberating. A few days later, I reactivated my membership at the climbing gym in Grandview Heights, a place I used to go to regularly before Megan started calling it pointless and dangerous, insisting that I was risking injury for no practical benefit. I remembered the exact tone she used, the way she would frame it as concern while subtly diminishing the value of something that made me feel strong and grounded. Walking back into the gym felt like stepping into a version of myself I'd set aside. The chalk dust hung in the air, the textured walls rising up in bright, geometric patterns, and I strapped into the harness with a focus that felt almost meditative. I climbed for 2 straight hours, my forearms burning, my fingers gripping holds that forced me to concentrate fully on the next move. There was no room in my mind for overanalysis or second-guessing, only the present moment and the steady rhythm of breathing. When I finally dropped back down to the mat, sweat-soaked and exhausted, I felt alive in a way I had not in years, not because I was rebelling against anything, but because I was inhabiting my own body without apology. At work, the change was even more noticeable. I finished a complex financial model in record time, one that had been sitting in draft form for weeks because I kept revisiting minor details and doubting my own assumptions. This time I approached it with clean concentration, building out projections, stress-testing scenarios, and finalizing the presentation without the usual mental fog. When I sent it to my manager, Linda, I expected a few revisions, but instead she called me into her office and told me she was recommending me for a lead analyst position tied to a $2.3 million client expansion project. She spoke in practical terms about performance and timelines, but there was a note of confidence in her voice that I had not heard directed at me in a long time. Walking back to my desk, I realized that the clarity I was experiencing was not accidental. I had not felt this focused in years, and the realization was both empowering and unsettling because it forced me to confront how long I had been operating at less than full capacity. Around the 3rd week, just as the new rhythm of my days had begun to feel stable, Megan's sister, Rachel, called me out of nowhere. I had not spoken to her since the night Megan left, and seeing her name light up my screen felt like a ripple from a past I had deliberately stopped touching. I answered calmly, expecting small talk or perhaps a neutral check-in, but her tone was already charged before I could even say hello properly. She asked me why I had not reached out to Megan, why I had not tried to fix things, why I was just sitting back as if none of it mattered. I let her finish without interrupting because I could hear the accusation forming between her sentences. When she finally paused, I explained in an even voice that Megan had explicitly told me not to contact her, not to call, not to text, not to reach out in any way, and that I was respecting exactly what she had asked for. I said that I had sent one message the morning after she left, and that she had told me, even that proved her point. So, I had chosen to honor her boundary fully and consistently. Rachel reacted as if I had admitted to something cruel. She said I was being cold, that a real husband would fight for his marriage, that silence was not love. I told her that ignoring someone's clearly stated boundary did not feel like love to me, that consistency was not the same as indifference. The conversation ended with an uncomfortable stiffness, her disappointment obvious and unfiltered. A few days later, Megan's best friend called with a similar tone but sharper edges. She did not ask for context. She accused. She said I was ghosting my own wife, that Megan was hurting and confused, that I was proving every negative assumption she had about me. I listened, feeling a strange detachment as the words washed over me. When I repeated that Megan had asked for complete space and that I was honoring that request, her friend almost laughed in disbelief. She said Megan had expected me to fight, to show up unannounced, to call repeatedly, to refuse to accept the distance. She said Megan thought that if I truly loved her, I would have ignored her words and pushed past them. That was the moment everything aligned in my head with uncomfortable clarity. This had never been about literal space. It had not been about my calendar tab or the steakhouse reservation or even the argument itself. It had been a test, a silent expectation that I would contradict her instructions in order to prove something emotional and dramatic. She had drawn a line and expected me to step over it. By choosing to stand exactly where she told me to stand, I had failed the unspoken requirement. The realization did not make me angry. It made me tired. I replayed that night in my mind. The packed bag, the rehearsed tone, the strict instructions not to contact her, and I understood that the outcome had been pre-written in a way I had not recognized at the time. If I had chased her, I would have been controlling. If I respected her boundary, I was cold. There was no version of compliance that would have been interpreted as right because the metric was not clarity. It was emotional performance. I had done exactly what I was told, and in doing so, I had exposed a truth that was far more uncomfortable than any argument about a shared calendar. Week 5 became the breaking point in a way I could not have predicted that morning when I left my apartment before sunrise, suit pressed, presentation notes organized neatly in my briefcase, mind fully locked in on the $2.3 million expansion project that had consumed my focus for days. The meeting with senior executives was scheduled for 7 a.m., and I had rehearsed every slide, every projection model, every contingency plan. My phone was on silent inside my briefcase because I knew the next few hours would require complete concentration, and I welcomed that tunnel vision. For 3 straight hours, I defended revenue assumptions, walked through growth curves, and answered rapid-fire questions about risk exposure and long-term scalability. The room was intense, controlled, professional, and I matched that energy with steady composure. When it finally ended and the executives filed out, I felt the familiar surge of adrenaline slowly drain from my system. I walked back to my desk, loosened my tie slightly, and opened my briefcase to check my phone for the first time that morning. The screen lit up with a flood of notifications that made my stomach drop. 76 missed calls, 88 text messages, all from Megan. The timestamp showed they had started early and escalated rapidly. The first messages were short and neutral, asking if I was there, asking if I could talk. Within minutes, the tone shifted to confusion, then frustration, then accusation. Why are you ignoring me? I know you see this. Don't do this to me. The last message read that she was coming to my office. Before I could process what I was reading, reception called my extension and told me that my wife was in the lobby and extremely upset. I could hear commotion faintly in the background through the phone line. My chest tightened, not with panic, but with a steady awareness that something public was unfolding. I walked toward the lobby with measured steps, aware of coworkers glancing up from their desks as I passed. When I reached the front area, I saw her immediately. She was crying, visibly shaken, dressed in sweatpants and an oversized hoodie. No makeup, hair pulled back carelessly. She looked nothing like the composed professional I had been married to for years. Her emotions filled the space, drawing attention from reception staff and colleagues who were pretending not to stare. She walked toward me as soon as she saw me, her voice already raised, demanding to know why I had not responded for weeks, why I had ignored her calls, why I was acting like she did not exist. I kept my voice calm, low enough that it contrasted sharply with her intensity. I reminded her, clearly and without sarcasm, that she had told me not to contact her in any way, that she had asked for complete space, and that I had respected exactly what she requested. Her face shifted from anger to disbelief. She said she did not mean it literally. She said I was supposed to fight for us, to show up, to refuse to accept her leaving. Standing there in the lobby of my office building, surrounded by the quiet hum of professional decorum and the unmistakable tension of onlookers, I realized how fundamentally different our interpretations of words were. She had given instructions, expecting resistance. I had given compliance, expecting clarity. Her tears continued, her voice trembling as she accused me of giving up too easily, of choosing pride over love. I remained steady, not because I felt nothing, but because something inside me had already adjusted to the reality that literal boundaries and emotional tests were not the same language. We agreed to meet later that evening at Franklin Park Conservatory, because neither of us wanted another scene in a private space where emotions could escalate without witnesses. The glass structure caught the fading light of the setting sun, and the air inside was warm and thick with the scent of soil and tropical plants. Families and couples moved quietly through the pathways, their conversations blending into a low, steady hum that made the space feel neutral and contained. We sat on a bench near a cluster of tall palms, far enough from others to speak privately, but close enough to remain aware that we were not alone. I did not circle around the subject or soften the edges of what I needed to say. I told her the truth as plainly as I could. The past month had been the most peaceful I'd felt in years. I explained that I had reconnected with friends I had slowly drifted from, that I had advanced at work in ways I had not anticipated, that I was sleeping through the night without waking up with a knot in my chest. I told her I had felt focused, steady, and more like myself than I had in a long time. The words were not meant to hurt her, and I made that clear, but I refused to dilute them. I said that the quiet had not been emptiness. It had been clarity. I told her I would not participate in a dynamic where words meant the opposite of what was said, where boundaries were instructions designed to be broken. I said that if she wanted reconciliation, it would require counseling with a licensed professional and a commitment from both of us to direct communication, to saying what we meant without hidden tests or emotional traps. I told her I was willing to work, but not to guess, not to perform, not to prove love by defying clear instructions. She looked at me for a long time after I finished, her expression softer than it had been in the lobby that morning. She asked if I was happier without her. I took a slow breath before answering, because I understood the weight behind that question. I said I was happier without constant tension. I did not say I was happier alone. I did not say I was happier married. I said I was happier without the low-level pressure that had become so normalized that I had stopped recognizing it. She asked if I wanted a divorce. The word landed heavily between us, even though it had not been spoken before that moment. I told her I would not chase someone who punished me for listening. I said that if she chose to leave again as a test, I would not run after her. I said I wanted a partnership built on clarity, not on guessing games. My voice remained even, not detached, but steady in a way that surprised me. The conversation did not end with a resolution. There was no dramatic reconciliation, no final decision, no clear path laid out before us. We sat there for several minutes in silence, the humid air pressing gently against my skin, the distant murmur of other visitors filling the space between us. When we finally stood and walked in opposite directions toward the parking lot, I felt something unfamiliar but solid inside me. I was not anxious. I was not spiraling through possible outcomes. For the first time since that Thursday night on Grand Avenue, I felt grounded, rooted in my own boundaries rather than suspended in someone else's expectations. 3 months later, the envelope arrived in the mail with her handwriting on the return address, neat and unmistakable, and I knew what it contained before I even opened it. Inside were divorce papers requesting an uncontested split, clean and procedural, no accusations, no dramatic language, just signatures required and dates outlined in plain legal terms. I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I had once scrolled through her shared calendar, and read every page carefully. I did not feel a surge of anger or betrayal. There was no impulse to negotiate out of pride, no desire to delay the inevitable out of sentimentality. There was only clarity. I signed the documents the same day and mailed them back without ceremony. The act felt less like an ending and more like acknowledging something that had already concluded weeks earlier at Franklin Park Conservatory. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I was promoted to senior analyst. The email from Linda came through on a Tuesday morning, formal but warm, outlining a $28,000 raise and expanded responsibilities. I read it twice, not because I doubted it, but because I wanted to absorb it fully. The focus I had rebuilt over the previous month had translated into measurable results, and the promotion felt earned rather than lucky. My days were structured and purposeful, my evenings steady and quiet in a way that felt restorative rather than empty. My weekends became something I genuinely anticipated. Saturday mornings often started with pickup basketball games where the rhythm of movement and friendly competition grounded me in the present. On other days, I spent hours at the climbing gym, pushing myself up new routes, feeling the familiar burn in my forearms and the quiet satisfaction of reaching the top. Sometimes I brought my camera down to the Scioto Mile, walking along the water at sunset, capturing reflections of the skyline against the river, the subtle shifts of light that changed everything in a matter of minutes. There was no one critiquing how I spent my time, no subtle commentary on practicality or productivity. There was simply space to choose. About a year after the divorce, I ran into Megan at a coffee shop near downtown. I recognized her immediately, even though she looked different, softer in some ways, more settled in others. She was wearing a ring I had never seen before, and she told me she was engaged. The words did not land like a blow. They landed like information. We stood there awkwardly at first. Then she apologized. She apologized for testing me, for expecting me to break the boundaries she had set, for showing up at my office and creating a scene. She said she had not understood then what she understands now. I listened without interrupting, not because I needed the apology to move forward, but because it felt appropriate to let it exist. I wished her well, and when I said it, I meant it. There was no hidden resentment under the words, no rehearsed civility. I genuinely hoped she would build something stable and clear. When she walked away and the door of the coffee shop closed behind her, I did not feel loss. I did not feel regret. I felt peace. She had wanted space, and I had given it to her fully and without theatrics. In doing so, I had stripped away tension I had mistaken for normal, and in the quiet that followed, I had rediscovered myself.